setup, so thank you. I asked Brian not to tell all the interesting details because there's not that many. Are you going to click for me? Okay, all right. Well, probably won't surprise anyone. I'm not a good stander. So my role here today, as co-founder of Green.org, is certainly to be very, very proud of what we're trying to create. But a lot of my job in this situation is storytelling. And I think that, again, to the question I asked Mary a little while ago, you can do lots of amazing things, do good around the world, but if nobody ever hears about it, then it's a little self-defeating. So my story really revolves around just one simple idea. And I think that it translates well as an adventurer. It translates well to both the nonprofit world and everybody's individual stories. And that is this simple idea that what happens to us isn't nearly as important as what we do about it. So, my story. When I was 29 years old, my first son was born. His name was Brett. And Brett didn't know it, but he was going to save me. Because at that point in my life, for about 12 years, I'd been a really hardcore drug addict. And I had tried everything that I knew how to quit. And nothing had ever stuck. And I thought that Brett, just by his mere birth, was actually going to change all that. Because surely I could quit for him. And for a little while, that's what happened. I remember holding this time, for those of you who are parents, this tiny little baby in my hands and feeling love and acceptance that I actually didn't know existed. Like, as an addict, I just thought I wasn't entitled to those feelings and that somehow I was just broken. So for the first time ever, I really felt hopeful and I felt strong. And I can't really explain what happened next, but several months later after his birth, I found myself predictably heading to the worst neighborhood in the city, where I basically spent the next 6 days killing myself with drugs and alcohol. And that 6-day binge ended with me sitting on the ground watching the police go through my car. And there's 3 bullet holes in the car, and those bullet holes were put there by somebody who was like shooting at me. Right? It wasn't accidental. They were trying to shoot me. And I always remember sitting there and watching this policeman search my car, and I'm sitting on the ground like just checking out this scene, and he reaches under the driver's seat and he pulls out this glass pipe, and he turns and he looks at me and he shakes his head in this condemning fashion that we all know. And any rational, moderately sane human being at that point would have thought, I'm in some serious trouble. Like, this is going to be bad. And all I could think was, so that's where that was. Sorry, it is funny. You can laugh. Sorry. And the point of that is just to tell you that's how sick I was. That's where I was. And what I realized in that moment, even after 6 days, I had this incredibly clear thought. Nobody is coming to save me. My son can't save me. No one else is going to save me. And the only person who has any chance of saving me is me. And so in that moment, I had a choice between living and dying, and I chose running. And so that night, I went to an AA meeting, and the next morning I got up and I put on my running shoes, and for the next 3 years, without missing a single day, I did those 2 things every single day. I went to a meeting, I went for a run, and I slowly began to build a life for myself. And during those 3 years, I ran somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 marathons or so. So clearly, I had that whole addiction thing under control. But what I discovered during that time was this, and people did actually question, maybe you just switched addictions. Is that all that's going on here? And I, people like to get in your head that way. And so I thought about it, and addiction for me was all about being invisible. It was about hiding, about not having any feelings at all. And running was the exact opposite for me. With running, I felt everything. I was fully present all the time. And that allowed me to actually be there for the first time ever, for my family, for my friends, for the people in my life. And what I also figured out was, I thought during those 3 years that I needed to eliminate my addict. And look, everybody in this room, we've been talking about a lot of issues today. And one that I know for sure is that every single person in this room fits a couple of categories. You either are an addict, you know an addict, you have an addict in your family tree somewhere, you've got a cousin, son, daughter, mom, dad, somebody in your life that has struggled with addiction, because it affects all levels of society. So I thought that I needed to eliminate that part of me. Like if I could take a scalpel and cut it out, that's what I would do. But it took those 3 years for me to understand that my addiction, my addictive personality, is actually all the best parts of me. Like it is the part of me that makes me good at things. It's what allows me to actually make big plans, take on big challenges, and go out there and try to make a difference. And so, again, in good addict nature, I figured if a little bit of running was good, then a lot of running would be fantastic. So I started to do runs and races all around the world. I ran across deserts and jungles. I ran across entire countries. I found myself at one point in the Amazon jungle. Haven't we all? And I'm hanging, I can always see this picture, I'm hanging like in a jungle hammock. Because in the Amazon, you don't want to sleep on the ground because there's a lot of stuff down there. So everybody's in hammocks, and I'm surrounded by strangers that are doing this event also. We're running like 200 miles across a big chunk of the Amazon jungle. And this guy who I'd never met before just kind of blurted out, he's like, I wonder if anyone's ever run across the entire Sahara Desert. And I would say that like words said to us by a stranger in passing can actually change the entire course of our lives. Of course, I actually told him, I piped up and I said, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I mean, no, it's not possible, first of all. No one could ever do that because you couldn't get resupplied, it's too hot, you couldn't run that far across deep sand. But I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about this idea. Like I just wouldn't let it go. And so I started to do some research and I figured out that in fact no one had ever run across the entire Sahara Desert. Go figure, right? So, and I decided in that moment that I was going to be the first person to do this. And I started to tell people. I started to say out loud to people that I was going to be the first person to ever run across the Sahara Desert. And what I found was even people that had been witnessing me do some relatively crazy things through the years would tell me that's a really cool idea, but it's just, it's not possible and you shouldn't do it. And I realized that every time I heard that from somebody, that I was told it was impossible, I found myself letting them own the impossibility, and I took full possession of all that was possible. And I just became determined that I was going to find a way to pull this off. I told this story often enough. And at the time, I was actually working as a senior producer for a TV show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition on ABC. So I was a shooter and a producer on that show for years. And so I had a few little connections. And one of my friends on the show, I think, just got tired of hearing me tell this story. And he offered to introduce me to a guy named James Mall. And James was a very well-known Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker. And so I leaped at the chance. I showed up late to the pitch, to the meeting. It was the worst pitch in history, like literally. But James, at the end of this meeting, stood up and stuck out his hand and said, "I'll do it." And I'm like, "What do you mean you'll do it?" He's like, "Yeah, if you go to the Sahara, then I'm going to be there to make a film about it." A week later, he calls and he says, "Look, I just hung up. I know we need a production team, right? I just hung up with Matt Damon. And Matt Damon would like to executive produce the film, and he would like to be the narrator of the film. Would that be okay with you?" And I'm not kidding when I say I took a beat, I gave it like 3 seconds, and I said, "I was really hoping for somebody better." But Matt Damon would be just fine. So I think click again. So a year later, I find myself on the coast of Senegal in West Africa with my team. And you can see we're looking at the map. And I look very intent, right? all I'm thinking here is I have suckered all of these people to the Sahara Desert, and we are all going to die. Like, that is what's on my mind at that point. So, about a week into this effort of running all the way across the Sahara Desert, we've completely fallen apart. It's 140-degree ground temperature every single day in Mauritania. We get out of Senegal into Mauritania. My 2 teammates are on IVs every day. 2 of my support people have quit. Like, the rats are leaving the ship. And it looks like it's going to be the shortest big expedition in history. And it took really hitting that bottom to figure out that I was doing this all wrong. I had been planning this, and I had so much pressure with sponsors and with expectations that all I could think about was getting to the finish. I was so focused on the end goal, the big goal, that I forgot the lessons that I learned in sobriety. And that lesson is the simple lesson of one day at a time. So on day 8, I woke up and all I thought about was running a marathon before lunch. All right, I ran that marathon, I got to lunch, I took a little break, and all I thought about after that was running a second marathon before dinner. And when the day was over, I took my thin foam mat and I put it down on the sand and I stared up at 1 billion stars because there wasn't an electric light within 500 miles. And I just gave thanks for the fact that I had the opportunity to be there suffering and alive, like feeling everything as a recovering addict and just human being. I want to take a quick step back. I don't normally tell this part of the story, but a year before this expedition, I did a scouting trip across from Senegal, in particular into Niger and a lot of regions in there, and all the way to Egypt and the Red Sea. But in particular in the center of the Sahara Desert, in Mali and Niger, what I found was the inspiration for what we're here to talk about today, which is a pretty simple idea. Nobody had any water. It's the Sahara Desert, right? So we all know that there's not much water there, but there is water under the ground. The wells were drying up all over the place. People were being forced, nomadic people were being forced from their lifestyle into these villages where there also wasn't any water, or there's very limited water. And so that was the inspiration for what we're talking about today. So I'll get to more of that in just a minute. But this run continued. I did actually make it to the end. Lost my clip over here. That's all right. And so what I'm going to do actually is just go ahead and show you a little bit of what I experienced, and then I'll continue. Got wire? Don't want to quit.
We saw a young boy, 7 or 8 years old, in the desert alone, fending for himself while his dad was a 2-day walk away to get water. That's the water situation. I mean, it's...
Lots of lights.
Yeah, good idea. Smart thinking. Let's start it over. Yeah. You can do this. You don't want to quit.
We saw a young boy, 7 or 8 years old, in the desert alone, fending for himself while his dad was a 2-day walk away to get water. That's the water situation. I mean, it's so much bigger an issue than I would have ever thought.
Narrated by executive producer Matt Damon and directed by James Mall, a personal and compelling journey into the world's most mysterious wilderness.
The purpose of the 3 of us coming here was to learn more about each other, to learn about the people of the Sahara, and to do something that hasn't been done before.
They all 3 agreed that if one runner went down, they would be out of the expedition.
I thought your commitment was different than that. When is the end? The end is when we get to Cairo. It will be a life-changing experience, and not just for the 3 runners, for everybody who's along on this journey. Sounds like fun, right? Enjoy clearing. So, to put it in perspective, we basically ran 2 marathons a day for 111 consecutive days without taking a day off. Who knew Africa was that big? You know, should have checked the maps for this. But yeah, we only had 2 showers the whole time, so be glad you weren't there. So, you know, it was a life-changing experience, but for a lot of reasons, not just the obvious physical ones. We did accomplish something that had never been done before, and firsts in the adventure world are really hard to come by. You know, there's not much out there that hasn't been done, and so you know, I got a chance to go on Leno and NPR, and I did all the morning news shows, and it was a lot of fun. But the true legacy of this, adventure was not what happened in the desert, but what happened after. So, as I told you, during the scouting trip, I had this, you know, epiphany, which it wasn't very hard because it was so in your face. People didn't have water, and so Matt Damon and I decided to create a foundation called H2O Africa. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not a philanthropist, all right? So I'm not standing up here like, I'm going to give you some stats in a minute that make me look really good. But it was all after the fact. Like, my passion was that I wanted to see if I had what it took to run across the Sahara Desert. Like, that was what was important to me. And I think that very often, in doing good, sometimes we lose sight of the things that really sort of turn us on, that make us want to go out there and do things. And for me, those things, you know, I need to do the selfish thing, which is the thing that I love to do, and find a way to attach something to it that is selfless. And then go do the thing, which is exactly the same. So during the run and in the time after the run, I toured the country and I showed the film Running in the Sahara, which is still on iTunes, by the way. And I raised about $6 million in a very short period of time, just by doing what I'm doing now, running my mouth. And not one time ever in that entire run of showing the film and being in front of big audiences did I ever ask for $1. It was never, I never once stood up there and said, you know, go to this website. Here, people are smart enough to understand that if they want to support something, they can support it. They don't actually need to be told that. So it was, I think, refreshing for a lot of folks that these screenings weren't used, you know, as a mechanism for fundraising specifically, although it did raise a lot of funds. So flash forward to today, H2O Africa became water.org shortly thereafter. Many of you still see Matt Damon doing Stella Artois commercials or whatever it might be. And last year, I'm proud to say that water.org surpassed $1 billion in funding. And we are the largest, you know, clean water nonprofit in the world. And a lot of the reason I tell stories. This is what I do, because I don't think people respond as well to a statistic that says 1 billion people don't have clean water and sanitation. It's an impossible number to wrap your mind around. And whereas if you show a picture of one 9-year-old little girl in Kenya who doesn't have water, it's far more impactful, and not in some way where it's taking advantage of the situation. I mean, I like the hopeful stories. You know, here is what clean water does. In most countries in the world, if there's no water, if there's no sanitation, girls don't get to go to school. Boys can pee outside, sorry. You know, it's the way it is. But in most of those parts of the world, if there isn't sanitation, if there isn't clean water, girls don't get an opportunity at education. I mean, water is the foundation for all of that. So I've been talking about, you know, water.org and clean water for a long time. And so when Brian and I met and Slade and we started talking about, okay, what can we do? Frankly, when Brian and I met, I told him about my next idea. And I've been working on, I have an endless number of bad ideas. So, and most of them are really painful for me personally. So go ahead. I don't even know what the next slide is. Oh, so I have continued, you know, through these years to do things. I just really like this picture most of these. But that's in Ecuador, and I did a fundraising run there. Go ahead. The icebreaker run was something I did a couple of years ago. I got 5 other recovering drug addicts, and we ran across the United States. We ran for 24 hours a day for 24 consecutive days in order, from LA to Washington, D.C., in order to bring attention to the need for greater mental health services in this country. Because we're not here to talk about, criminal justice and those things, but, the fact of the matter is, as a country, we put our drug addicts in jail. That's basically how we deal with the problem, and it's not the right way to go about it. It doesn't, fiscally it doesn't work, emotionally it doesn't work, community-wise it doesn't work. So that's what this run was about. Next. Now we get to the fun part. So I decided that I had been through this very long roller coaster that I think all of us go through, which is this incredibly long series of highs and lows. We're all basically on this path of high points and low points, and I came up with the idea that I wanted to put a literal spin on that and go from the lowest elevation, the lowest point in the world, to the highest point in the world. And to do that, I was going to the Dead Sea. I am going to the Dead Sea in Jordan, and I'm swimming out into the Dead Sea, and I'm going to do a free dive to the lowest point that I can reach in the Dead Sea. Swim back to shore, run 2,000 miles across the Arabian desert. When I get to the tip of Oman, I'm getting into a kayak and paddling 1,000 miles to Mumbai, India. And when I get to Mumbai, I'm getting on a mountain bike, and I'm riding that bike to the base of Mount Everest, where I will climb to the top of Mount Everest. And when I get there, I'm going to pour out a little flask of water that I carried with me from the Dead Sea as a symbolic joining of the ends of the earth. And I think it's this kind of idea that has the opportunity to get people to follow along and to be part of the story. Mary's not here anymore, but it was a trick question, because part of the story telling, you can do so many amazing things, but a press release very often, or a, whatever, kind of the normal thing that people expect when they get their information, just doesn't really hit home. If we give them something to follow, something else in the storytelling area, it just makes a big difference. So actually, I'm going to show you just a really short video right now of what this might look like. Thanks, Mitch. Throw roses into the abyss and say, "Here's my thanks to the monster who didn't succeed in swallowing me alive." I've always done things the hard way. The easy way just isn't interesting to me. I was an addict. I spent 18 months in federal prison, divorced, remarried, fallen in love, raised a family, cheated death. But I've never done anything like this before. People ask me, "Why are you doing this?" I ache for this.
Yeah.
Since I haven't done this one yet, you all get a chance to come with me on this one. So, literally and figuratively. So, look, this goes back to what I talked about in the very beginning, and I do believe it's the same for all of us. Doesn't matter what happens to you, it only matters what you do about it. And the same is true for the environmental and sustainability mess that we're in these days. Because the fact of how we got here, sure, that's important and we need to change things, but the question is what to do about it now. And how do we move forward? And so I am actually starting this 5.8. By the way, I call this 5.8 because it's 4,500 miles or a little more from the lowest place on the planet to the highest point on the planet, but it's actually only 5.8 vertical miles from that low point to the high point. So it's 5.8 vertical miles. That's it. And that tiny little sliver of atmosphere that covers the entire planet, we're already all in it together. Every human being on the planet lives within that little tiny space. So as I like to say, whether you want to be involved or not, you're already in it. So the adventure begins next month, by the way, not Dead Sea to Everest, but I'm actually doing this lowest to highest on all 7 continents. Because why only do one, you know? So, next month is Africa, and I think that's the next slide. Oh, no, well, that's okay. You know what? Go for it. Yeah, there you go, and then we'll go back to that one. So, in Africa next month, I'm going to go, starting at the end of next month, I'm starting at the coast of East Africa in Djibouti. There's a lake there called Lake Assal, which is the lowest elevation in Africa. I'm going to do a free dive there, which, by the way, I'm not a free diver, so seems like a really bad idea. But my joke that I always say is, in case somebody wants to do this after me, I just want to make it a little bit harder on them. And so I'm going to do a free dive in this lake. I'm going to come up, run across a short portion of Djibouti into the Rift Valley in Ethiopia, across all of Ethiopia and Kenya into Tanzania to the top of Kilimanjaro. And I have partnerships with T-Mobile, with Dick's Sporting Goods, with Dollar Shave Club, with Volcom, with Spartan. So I have some really amazing brand partnerships that have gotten on board this idea of telling a story in a different way. They understand I'm not a pitch man. I'm not going to stand up there and hold their product. I'm going to use products that I believe in from companies that are trying to do the right thing out there. And so, go back to this next slide. So, green.org, which I can't be more excited about it because we are going to use 5.8 as a mechanism for telling stories. This adventure across Africa will take me about 30 days to complete. And so during those 30 days, we will have an incredibly robust following. And you guys will get all the information on how to follow. So if you're signed up and you RSVP, then you'll get an email whether you want one or not. And you'll be able to sign up to follow the adventure. But I think what's important, and the final thing I want to talk about is, this is a great example of the kind of technology that green.org is using, because the goal for us is not to recreate everything, but to partner with nonprofits in the places, at least at first, that I'm going to be going through. Some of those, that's part of our focus. So like in this case, with regard to Africa, in the Sahara, there is no water, or it's underground, so you have to access it. In a lot of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, there is actually flowing water, but the vast majority of it is contaminated, and it's dirty, and it's undrinkable. So this is called Deca Water, and this is technology that we own. It uses a very simple process of sand and microbes to actually filter water. This unit right here, the average well that you dig is at least $15,000. This unit right here is less than $5,000, fully installed, and can service more than 1,000 people with one unit. So it's really a life changer for the people that we will give this technology to. And I think the other thing is, part of our goal is to make sure that we partner with the right people in the locations where we're going so that they are empowered to maintain the equipment, to have true sustainability. Because you can dig a well and put in a nice cement top and a pump handle, and if you haven't taught the people there how to maintain it or how to fix it if it breaks, the pump handle breaks, then what happens? Well, if they don't know how to do it, they're going to take a pickaxe and a shovel and they're going to dig all that out. They're going to put buckets in the water and they're going to contaminate it. And now their problem is actually worse than it was before we built the well. And so with something like Deca Water, our mission is to give them something, A, that's really simple to use, but that B, they have the ability and opportunity to sustain on their own. So that's just one small example. I mean, we want to put in hundreds of these units across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania as one of